So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our event today, which is on the Built Environment Competence Standards work programme, and focusing in particular on the new duty holder standards, their rollout and implementation. They're going to be published in about a month's time, so we're very close now to that. A little bit of housekeeping, please. So yes, this is a listen-only webinar. It's being recorded today. We do welcome your questions via the Q&A function, but we do have a very busy schedule this afternoon, so we'll see how many of those we can cover, and otherwise we will take those offline. If you do experience any technical difficulties, please submit those via the Q&A function as well. We will be issuing a feedback survey and forwarding the presentations and recording of the webinar in due course. It's a CPD recognised webinar, so please request your certificate if you would like that following the session itself. So I'm Claire Price. I'm sector lead in the Built Environment team here at BSI, and I have been the project lead on the BECS work programme. It has been a long two-year project, which we began back in March 2020 with a town hall meeting at the Royal College of Physicians in central London. I think that was the last live event that I went to before COVID struck. And the programme has been running all through that two-year period. It's been highly collaborative. There's been a huge amount of involvement and a great many individuals who've participated across the board, and we thank everyone very, very much indeed for their participation and contributions during the project. We broke a few records in terms of the number of responses we had to the different consultations across the 4 standards that we have produced during the project. The overarching framework, the BSI Flex 8670, was particularly well considered by potential users. We were getting between 800 and 900 comments on each of those 2 consultations for that. So there was a huge amount of interest all the way through the programme. And as I say, we're now coming to the end with the publications of the 3 PASs that are due towards the end of July. But as we know, the development and publication of standards is really just the beginning. Industry must now take them up, adopt them, implement their requirements. Training is going to be needed, and assessment systems need to be put in place as well. So still a lot of very important work to do in order to deliver on that original challenge from Dame Judith Hackett for industry to develop an improved set of systemic competencies. But this is a major step. So if we can just quickly look at the agenda before I hand over and get things started. I'm happy to be able to welcome Dr. Scott Steedman, who will be giving some opening remarks in a moment or two. And then we'll be hearing from Cara Kashim-Santa from DLUC on the Building Safety Act and the regulations, and then from Andrew Moore from HSE as the new Building Safety Regulator on the developments there. And then moving on to the 3 PAS documents, which is perhaps the main part of the event today. Adrian Dobson from REBA will be looking at the competence framework for the principal designer, PAS 8671. Pete Dorber from Solvair Limited covering 8672, which is for the principal contractor competence framework. And Anthony Taylor, consultant, delivering on PAS 8673 around managing building safety. Then we'll finish with Anna Fricker, my colleague Anna Fricker from BSI, who will talk about CPB1, which is our new BSI Technical Committee for BSI Competence Standards. And Scott will then close the event, which we expect to be about 2:30. All right, so I will hand over now to Scott. Thanks very much, and I will then you can pass back to me at the end of that, then, Scott. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Claire, and good day to everybody. I have to use the good day nowadays because it's an Australian expression apparently, but it's just good afternoon. Thank you so much, Claire. This is an amazing moment for me. I remember sitting in this office and having conversations very early on with Graham Watts around the Competence Steering Group and the work of that community in trying to shape the ideas around standards to support confidence in the built environment. And Graham, I'd like to pay tribute to you, if you're on the call, to thank you for engaging with us in the National Standards Body to support the work of the CSG. That was such a pivotal moment, and it led to a huge and very interesting engagement with the wide community. There were two recommendations that came out from the CSG, recommendation 20 on the idea of a suite of national standards and supporting documents, and recommendation 23, which was around the idea that additional competence beyond technical competences should be identified for the key roles, principal designer, principal contractor, and at that stage we were talking about a building safety manager, and that's now morphed into an issue about building safety management, which I welcome. So the work or the recommendations of the CSG were taken forward in a systems approach. And I have to say that the cooperation that we saw across the entire community was really second to none. I mean, the coming together following Judith Hackett's report that Claire's mentioned, but then coming together around this idea that when you're talking about disproportionate disaster, you're talking about the idea of somebody being on point for overseeing building safety at any point in the life cycle of a building, from design through construction, maintenance, update, and management in particular, the great life cycle of our physical assets. This was a really modern approach, a really cooperative approach to say, let's all get together and work it out. And at that time, as you recall, where we launched this, Claire's already mentioned the Royal College of Physicians. I remember, we used to, at that stage, just still hesitantly shaking hands, wondering what this thing that was coming down the pipe was going to be. And here we are, emerging from the other end of the COVID pipe into the bright sunlight, and hoping for a better future in that respect anyway. So the idea that we would set about creating a system even before we had a building safety bill that Cara will explain in a minute, and even before we had a building safety regulator who had a scope defined at that point, that we would do it together. We would iterate together around the use of standards, the shape of those standards, the suite of documents that would interface between the world of government, the department, the regulation, the world of the regulator, the world of accreditation, and the work of UCAS and the Engineering Council, who I also would like to thank for their huge commitment to make accredited certification work for those organizations that would step up and provide the additional training and qualification we needed. So that was the journey that we embarked on 2 years ago at the Royal College, and it's just very exciting. It's fantastic, really, to come to this point where we are delivering. I mean, we are delivering on that promise that you all made, that we would take a systems approach. We would step forward together as a community, government, regulator, industry, professional bodies, national standards body on our part, facilitating that process, to come up with 3 PAS standards that would provide the detail and an overarching, what will be a British standard, the Flex 8670 that Claire mentioned, that took forward the work that had already been done by the Competence Steering Group and framed it into the essence of a national standard. And I think that suite of standards is something that the UK should be very proud of. I don't think there are other countries that have progressed at that pace and at that level to develop such a suite of competence standards that interface so cleanly between industry practices, regulator, regulation, and the accreditation community. So my only wish in going forward is that the implementation is as successful and progressive as the development. We had our ups and downs on that journey, but I commend all of you for your commitment to seeing it through. The fact that they will now operate alongside the Building Safety Bill and the work of the HSE, its regulator, is really very exciting indeed. So lots more to do, Claire, lots more to do for all of you, for all of us, but on behalf of the National Standards Body, in which the trust that you placed in us to help bring us through this journey in such a short time frame, with the added challenges of having to do so much online over the last 2 years, remarkable. So thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to a very interesting webinar. Thank you, Claire, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Scott. We're going to hear from Cara Kasham-Santa now on the Building Safety Act and regulations. Cara is the policy lead for industry competence, the Building Safety Programme at DLUC. And she's been leading on the industry competence in their Building Safety Programme since 2018. So we've been working together right from the start of the programme. She's been overseeing the development of the framework suite, as well as working on the Building Safety Bill at the same time, and working with other industry groups too to support their work on improving competence. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Cara. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Cara. I want to stress the fact, that Scott was saying that the collaboration that we've been working with the industry from 2018, since the packet report was published, and industry just stepped up quickly to lead this work to improve competence. And because I've been involved from the early days, I can see the level of collaboration that was second to none, really. So the Building Safety Act is a big milestone for us, not just for government, but I think for everyone in the built environment industry. So it's taking forward the government's commitment to a fundamental reform of the building safety system. The acts give effect to the policy that were set out in the Building Safer Future consultation, and we published it in April 2020. And these are based on the recommendations of Dame Judith Hackett's independent review of building regulations and fire safety that was published in May 18. So the bill recently became an act in April. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of overview of the Act, so the Act mainly sets up the Building Safety Regulator and paves the way for a new national regulator for construction products, and also for the New Homes Ombudsman. It seeks to improve the competence and oversight of the industry and regulator in the built environment industry. It sets out a new legislative framework for the design, construction and management of higher risk buildings, and it improved the route to redress and introduced new protection for leaseholders from remediation costs. Next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of, the Act has 6 parts. It's got 171 clauses and 11 schedules. So just to give you a brief overview of what each of the parts do. So part 1 just set out an overview and the structure of the Act. Part 2 is mainly about the Building Safety Regulator and its function. Part 3 is the one that concerns sort of design and construction phase. So they set out amendments to the Building Act in 1984 to provide for kind of new regulatory regime during design and construction, and also for higher risk buildings, and also for regulation of building control professions. And this part includes the duty holders' duties and competence requirement. Part 4 is about occupied building in scope, so it's higher risk building only, and these kind of set out the duties of the accountable person. Part 5 became quite a big part in the later stages of the bill, but it covers other measures such as construction products, architects, industry schemes, extension of the limitation periods for the Defective Premises Act and leaseholders protection. And part 6 is just about general provisions around commencement. Next slide, please. So what does the Act means for building owners and duty holders, and probably all of you who are listening today? So for design and construction of all buildings, it introduces the duty holders' role based on the CDM models and the competence requirements for them. For design, construction and management of higher risk buildings, so the key requirements will be, it will introduce gateways, which is a stop-go decision point before construction and occupation can start. It introduces the golden thread of building information. This should start during construction, and then the information should be stored and updated throughout the building life cycle to support the ongoing management of building safety risk. It introduces the safety case approach to managing building safety risk for occupied building. So the accountable person must give assurance to the building safety regulator and residents that they effectively and proportionately have measures in place to manage building safety risk on an ongoing basis. For those who don't meet the obligations, they may face criminal charges and up to 2 years in prison and unlimited fine. So next slide, please. So the next one, I'm just going to focus on sort of competence-related clauses. So the Building Safety Regulator will be established within the Health and Safety Executive. So it is, I think it's from the day that the Act got royal assent. So the regulator will have 3 core functions. The first one is to implement and regulate the regime for high-risk buildings or buildings in scope. The second function will be to oversee the safety and performance of all buildings. And the third one is to facilitate improvement of competence of building inspectors, the regulator, and the built environment industry. Next slide, please. So as part of their competence function, the Act requires the BSR to establish an industry competence committee to oversee and support the improvement of competence of the built environment industry. The statutory committee is expected to be established around October 23, but in the interim, the HSC has already established the Interim Industry Competence Committee, which I'm sure Andrew will talk more about it in his presentation. So on the slide, you can see these are the sort of key statutory function, but they're not limited to these, so the committee can decide what is appropriate for them. And next slide, please. So the next one is about duty holders. So the Act and secondary legislation will introduce the duty holder roles during design and constructions. This will apply to all design and building work on all buildings, not just higher risk buildings. This is based on the CDM models, but they will be responsible for ensuring compliance with building regulations. Rather than on the health and safety side, but it can be the same person taking on the same role. Secondary legislation will set out more details of the duty holders' duties. Next slide, please. So the next one, we're talking about the competence requirements. So there are clauses in the bill, and there will be regulations as well that will require anyone who carry out work, design or building work will need to have the relevant competence for their role, so whatever they're doing, or they could be appropriately trained and be supervised by someone who is competent. There will also be a double lock duty, so anyone who permits any person or appoint any person to carry out work need to take reasonable steps to ensure that the people they appoint or permit to do the work are competent. The principal designer and principal contractor, we're talking about these kind of key duty holders roles now. So where there are organizations, they must take reasonable steps to ensure that there is a person who is designated to manage their function on their behalf as the PC and PD. They must make sure that these people are competent to do so. And the BSI standards that my colleagues will be speaking about will support this requirement. Just to mention more additional requirements for higher risk buildings. So with Gateway 2 application, so this is for new build. So the client must provide with the application together with other information. The client must provide a declaration that they've assessed the competence of the PD and PC, and they're satisfied that these people are competent, and they could provide written records of the step they've taken to assure themselves that these people are competent. And also for other workers, it's kind of generic policy about competence management. So for Gateway 2, people will have to submit construction control plan, and there will be other documents relating to the plan, but one of which would include information on competence management. Can we skip to the next 3 slides, please? So I have provided the attendees with a bit more info on Gateway processes, golden thread of information, and building control oversight on this slide, but it's more for your info, and you can read it later. But I'm going to skip to the slide that says accountable person. So keep going, please, to the next one. This one, yeah, thank you. So we now come to sort of occupation stages. So the Act will introduce the role of accountable person who will be appointed for in-scope buildings. They will be responsible for a range of duties. First of all, they have to register the building. This is the new building and existing buildings. And they will have to apply for a building assessment certificate. They will have to manage building safety risk appropriately. They will have to prepare and submit a safety case report for review by the BSR. They will have to put in place a residents engagement strategy. I'm not going to talk much about the safety case, but yeah, you have information about it here as well. The next slide, the next 3 slides again provides you a bit more details about Part 5 of the bill. So one of which that would be worth mentioning, Part 5 of the Act includes amendments to the Architects Act, which will enable the Architects Registration Board to monitor competence of architects on their register. It will allow the ARB to remove them from the register if they do not meet the requirement or criteria or found guilty of professional misconduct. The Act also provides enhanced legal options for building owners to be able to pursue developers, contractors and manufacturers for shoddy construction works, defective products, where homes have been made uninhabitable in the past 30 years. Sorry, can you skip to the next 3 slides quickly, please? So I've spoke about this, but this is the information for the attendees, so they can read more about it later. The next one, please. So yes, what's next? So as now we've got the Act, actually most of the Acts will require secondary legislation to kind of give effect to and provide more detailed policies around quite a lot of areas. However, some of the clauses commenced already. And I think today we've got quite many of the clauses in Part 5 that are commencing, including the one to do with the extension of the Defective Premises Act. So HSC now becomes the Building Safety Regulator. Most courses require secondary legislation to set out details. We are working on a major program of secondary legislation to implement the detail regime. We aim to consult on some of these over the summer. I can't say quite exactly when, but shortly we will publish the consultation document setting out detail, including on the duty holders' competence requirement, the higher risk building regimes, gateway, golden thread, etc., etc. As you can see from the transition plans of the different parts of the Act will commence in different timescales, but our intention is that the requirements relating to duty holders and competence and the higher risk buildings regime will be in place around October 2023. We aim to write regulation about 6 months before, give you a bit of time to prepare. The next slide, please. So what's next for the built environment industry? So there is a lot of work to do for the industry now. So one of which is what we're going to talk about today, which is the competence standards and framework, which we've sponsored the BSI to work with our industry experts to develop them to support the Act's requirement. So my colleagues will talk more about them. The intention is the BSR will provide guidance that will help the client and the accountable person and the duty holders to meet their duties, particularly on competence, including guidance on sort of criteria for selecting competent people and workers, and particularly for the principal designer and principal contractor and the people who will manage safety in residential buildings. The guidance will make reference to the standards and also the industry's work. As Scott and Claire mentioned before, there is a lot of work in the industry, particularly through the competence steering group and all the working groups that have been coming up to improve their kind of competence frameworks, and they are developing their kind of sector-specific frameworks. So we encourage everyone to continue your work to improve competence and to prepare people for the new regime, building on the work of the competence steering group. So we encourage you to continue to refine or develop your sector's specific competence frameworks or standards, and they should be mapped against the core criteria for building safety, or the FLEX 70. You should continue to identify the skills and capacity gaps. Once you've got your framework in place, you should map against the existing standards and where you need to be. You should identify and provide what kind of additional training or upskilling that you'll need, what kind of CPD programs that people will find useful. And you could set up accredited competence schemes or registers for your sector. I think that's all from me, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cara. That was really, really good and really helpful. And yeah, so all those extra slides, of course, will be circulated in the packs after the event. So we have had a couple of questions come through. One is actually about the situation in Scotland and the fact that there are duty holder roles there, as well as in this new regulation regime in England, and perhaps you just sort of clarify the coverage, really, I suppose, about this Act and regulations.
So the Act only covers mainly England, but also in Wales, although in the detail area, Welsh government have a say. They make their own decision about how they want to regulate. So, for example, the Building Safety Regulator is only for England, while in Wales it will be different. So in Scotland, they've got a completely different system. However, we see that the standards that we are developing will support the competence requirement in any devolved governments or any kind of legislatures in the UK or even international.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Another one which is about whether the new safety bill refers to the new fire door maintenance and what are they, the maintenance and inspection requirements?
I think that's the Fire Safety, the Fire Safety Act, which amends the Fire Safety Order. So yeah, it would define fire doors and external walls. But sorry, I'm not the expert on this area, so apologies for that.
Okay, no problem, thank you. So there was a question about being able to access the framework standard BSI Flex 8670. So we will be circulating the web address. We do have a dedicated website where that can be downloaded. And once the 3 PAS documents are published, they'll also be able to be downloaded from there as well. So we'll be circulating that at the end. Just one more for you actually, Cara, about when the guidance is going to be available. I think that might actually, unless it's referring to HSE guidance, so that might be.
That's for Andrew, I think, but I think they're writing it as we speak. Yeah. Andrew can say more about it.
Okay, indeed. All right. Well, thank you very much, Cara. Thank you. That was really helpful. And
thank you.
I think we can move on now to Andrew Moore, who is the industry competence lead for the Building Safety Programme at the Health and Safety Executive. Andrew has over 20 years experience with HSE. Most recently, he's become the industry competence lead under the Building Safety Regulator team. And this role involves liaising with industry stakeholders to support the standards, guidance and frameworks that can be used to grow that competence into the new building safety regime. He also is the secretariat, holds the secretariat for the interim industry competence committee, the IICC, which no doubt he'll say a little bit more about. And that's where he helps to identify and address the strategic competence priorities. So thank you. Over to you now, Andrew.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, really delighted to be here, to have this opportunity to speak to everyone, to bring you up to date on the work we've been doing so far at BSR and thinking about our priorities for the future. Focus very much, as Claire mentioned, on industry competence. I'm conscious I've got a 15-minute slot, so I'll try and rattle through my presentation in about 10 minutes to leave a bit of time for questions at the end. Oh, and also just to pick up the question from the previous session, the guidance that we are looking to create is going to be due out around about October for first consultation. So it's that sort of time frame. Clicked too far. So there's already a mistake in my first slide. It should be the Building Safety Act. And as Cara mentioned, the Building Safety Regulator has 3 main functions, competence being one of those. And although lots of the publicity goes to the high-rise regulatory regime, actually competence is of equal importance. And as Cara mentioned, it's the competence for those working in all buildings. And I think it's important to double down on this point, that it is a competence of all buildings. And I think possibly speakers coming after me might mention this as well. I've heard lots of comments from stakeholders that filtering through that people will potentially avoid the new requirements by not working on any high-rise projects. And I think it's important to say that simply isn't the case. these changes will affect everyone working in buildings, high-rise or not. So just a bit of an overview of the HSE, the BSR's approach to competence, and we're really looking to follow the recommendations in Dame Judith Hackett's report, supporting industry, coming up with frameworks and standards, obviously, as we're going to be talking about today with the BSI, the fantastic work that's been carried out here. We don't see this as government's job to do in the first instance, because we acknowledge that actually people in industry who understand what's best and what's needed to carry out to raise the game. That doesn't mean that government HSE isn't going to get involved. For example, I have lots of conversations around balancing competence, the aspirations to push trades, professionals and sectors to aspire as far as they can, but also trying to ensure that that's proportional and the barrier isn't set so high that it means no one can reasonably meet it. As mentioned previously, we're also we're going to be a regulator of another regulatory body, so we'll be the overseer of the building control profession. We'll be registering building control professionals and overseeing the work they are carrying out, and working with organisations including BSI. Again, this is a really fundamental part of the work. But just to kind of give a bit more of a big shout out, as they say, I think the work of the CSG, as Scott mentioned, with Graham Watts and all of the different people contributing to that group, I think is worth reflecting on and mentioning, because of the suite of work across all the roles within the built environment, and also the work of the Competent Persons Forum as well, and the mandatory technical competencies for those working competency schemes. So there is lots of competency work going on, and because of that, as Cara mentioned before, we have recruited an independent industry competence committee, really to help us in the first instance support the BSR, to know where to intervene and how to intervene, really, to guide us in terms of priority areas and what action will have the best results, and really from our perspective, from the BSR, to provide that bridge, that link between industry, wider industry, and the BSR. Now, this committee has been going now for a year, and within it we've got a number of different working groups. And just very, very briefly to summarise this down, we were looking at one of the working groups is looking at the strategy. So really thinking about what our strategic aims are in the long term, as it says there in the slide, the path to cultural change, and not necessarily the easy stuff that we can do immediately, but actually some of the harder stuff that might take 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and how we can start on that road to that sustained impact. Also, we'll have a baseline subgroup, which is really thinking about, well, how can we understand the future if we don't understand what's going on now? So actually having some baseline so we can see whether or not we've been effective in the future or not. We'll also have an engagement group, which is looking to engage with others, to learn from others, to listen, but also how we can interact with other groups to amplify potentially the messages from the committee. And finally, a capability and capacity group, because it's not all about what's happening 10 years in the future, it's about what's happening now as well. So really thinking about how we can, some of the things that I think Claire and Scott and Cara mentioned around trying to get people to take up training, to do it now, to think about the demand, encourage demand, and also encourage supply, and how we can get that system moving forward. One of the ways we approach it, or the philosophy behind that, is a sort of a comp approach, comp as in competency. And the first aspect within that is comprehension or awareness, and ensuring that that people understand what they need to do to be competent, that the necessary guidance standards is out there. So obviously this, having the BSI standards will be fundamentally helpful for industry to have that aid, to have that ability to reference something, to understand what their requirements are, and making sure that when these standards are there, that people are aware of them and know how to use them. The next step is actually about obtaining the necessary training, upskilling, building on from the standards, and actually going out and doing it, and being competent to it. Next is measuring, and this is really about the demonstration of the required levels of competence, and really thinking about how can that be done in a fit for purpose way to explain and ensure that that people can demonstrate the competence required to carry out the roles that they're doing. And finally, performance. This sort of takes it on the extra step, ensuring those competent people who have all of the necessary competence training is actually using that and are using it to demonstrate the desired behaviours, attitudes, ethics, etc. And just finally, just to reference some work that the committee, the strategic committee, is doing, particularly John Vanston is leading this, our chair, around what we call a culture of competence, which is really setting out what the behaviours are, what the roles are, what the behaviours are for different roles, and hoping that this is something that can be operationalised by organisations to help them on that competency journey. I wanted to, as well as thinking about what we're doing in the kind of the wider sense, actually sort of give a bit of an insight into the way that HSE is approaching this. And certainly we try to be as much as possible an evidence-based regulator, and in order to take forward some of the strategies of the BSR, we wanted to collect evidence as to what the situation is now to help us build interventions. And we often think of the built environment in terms of sectors, clients, contractors, or roles, designer, risk assessors. However, when our researchers spoke to a myriad of people across the built environment, they were able to build 4 types or typologies to categorize where the built environment industry is at the moment. And I think it's quite interesting because actually it goes from the sort of the left, which is those organizations who are optimistic and welcoming. So these are generally organizations that are well resourced, have good infrastructure to support change, and are very much open therefore to this type of change. Open but anxious, so the next box, that don't have the same amount of resources but could potentially bring in support from others to help them in terms of training and others. There's aware but constrained. These are organizations who want to do the right thing but don't necessarily understand what the right thing is, so need a bit more spoon feeding and need a bit more support from others, government included. And then on the far right is the unaware and unconcerned. So these are the organizations who essentially don't know and don't want to know with regards to any changes, building safety or similar. So I just wanted to share this because from our point of view within the BSR, we recognise that a one-size-fits-all approach isn't appropriate. Those on the left require sort of nudging, support, guidance, and those on the far right require a bit more of the kind of the regulatory approach to bring it to light. Maybe the regulator showing their teeth a little bit. This next slide looks at the building control process for high-rise buildings. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, other than to say that I think this really demonstrates that the competency requirements are going to be significant within the HRB schemes, because actually there's going to be some specific requirements to demonstrate to the regulator issues around building control, change control, building regs at the design and construction phase. And I think the sort of the key message is the way the BSR will approach all of this is to ensure that design is appropriate, complies with all necessary requirements, and then making sure that the building is built to design. So the question for the regulator will be not does it comply with the building regs when it comes to assess the build phase, it will be has it been built to design. So possibly a subtly different shift in that respect. Competence and the golden thread. I think Cara touched on this a little bit more. I think there will be quite significant competence required to deal with the golden thread, because it can be a challenging task of making the right decisions to keep the information, actually to be discerning about this, because it's not all building information, it's information that impacts on the safety of the building. And in my experience, organisations lose this information in 2 ways. They either throw it away, so it's physically lost, or they mix it in with everything else, so it's unobtainable. And those of you who have heard me speak before, one of my favourite anecdotes is a great episode of Yes Minister, where Sir Humphrey explains to the Minister the best way to hide an incriminating document is to file it, as it's a surefire guarantee no one will ever find it again. Just want to touch briefly upon regulator competence. One of the criticisms within the independent review by Dame Judith was that regulators weren't working in a joined up capacity. From the BSR perspective, we're not looking to recreate the competencies of building control and the fire authority. What we're looking to do is provide a multidisciplinary team to draw in these specialisms so they can provide an expert view and an expert opinion to this multidisciplinary team. The BSR will then be the ultimate decision maker. So the competencies required, the competencies that very much already exist within HSE, being able to draw on expert opinion and making regulatory decisions on that basis. I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. I'm conscious that Cara already has mentioned these regulations, but I think it's useful that the competency duty holder regs mirror CDM, and the learning that can be moved across, I think, will be very beneficial, because ultimately a principal contractor can coordinate, cooperate, plan, manage and monitor health and safety and the building regs. I don't think there's a huge jump between the two in terms of management systems, although the outcomes are different. Again, I won't touch on this too long because of time, but I'm just, with regards to the role of clients, I think it's important. One of the priorities for the Building Safety Regulator will be to get clients on board, because actually, as it says there, they set a critical tone for building work. If we get clients bought into this process, I think that will flow in the system. And if we don't get clients bought in, that will be a challenge. So again, it's just a priority for us. And just finally, residents' engagement. I think that's really it's a fundamental part of everything that we do within the Building Safety Regulator, trying to get residents engaged, understand their needs, put them at the centre of what we're doing, and we have an interim residents panel in order to do that. So I'm going to stop there, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, that's great and really helpful. So we have had a couple of questions come through. How well prepared, I think, this is slightly cheeky, but how well prepared does HSE feel for this new role? I mean, obviously, it's hugely challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been busy in the background, scurrying away, preparing ourselves for quite a long time now, and I think we are. With Royal Assent, we've moved away from building to actually thinking about actually doing and actually becoming a building safety regulator, and we are, as we speak, recruiting to bring in that field force that we require to carry out and be the building safety regulator. And I think what's helpful is that some of although the technical detail will be different around the building regs than it is around health and safety, some of the methodologies and the approach and the regulation are all things that we're very comfortable with HSE, and ultimately was the reason that we were chosen to be the building safety regulator. Mm-hmm. So I think, as it said, within kind of the multidisciplinary team approach, we can bring that health and safety executive methodology and apply that to the kind of technical expertise within building control. So I think, yeah, I think we're very positive about the future, and I think it's going to be something we think will work well.
Great. And then a question about the improved inspector and the lead inspector as appointed by the HSE role. So there are current approved inspectors. Will they be able to act as lead inspector as appointed by the HSE going forward?
It's a really good question. So I think my understanding is, in the first instance, we'll be working with local authority building control. But there's no decision to take approved inspectors out of the system, and ultimately there's a recognition that I think, again, I don't know if this statistic is totally true or not, but it's one that I've heard a few times, that at the moment about 70% of HRBs go through the approved inspectors. So we recognise that they have a significant amount of competence there, so we would like to draw on that. So yeah, so I think there will be plans to include them in the system. I'm not exactly sure of the mechanics and how that will work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, thank you. And actually, this could be you or Cara, really. Yes, how the golden thread is going to be kept in place as properties change ownership and come under potential different management. You know, during the whole asset's life cycle, that whole approach to the golden thread. I mean, how is that going to work ultimately?
Well, yeah, that's the $1 million challenge, isn't it? How are we going to keep all of this information alive and through different systems and different databases? And I think it's about being discerning. And I think that obviously the future will be electronic, and it's having those key pieces of information in electronic format. If it's in a BIM system, when it comes to the actual design, and actually being able for accountable person as another to really think about that, and actually not just think about the building from the infrastructure, from the point of view of bricks and mortar, but to think about that information management infrastructure as well. So I don't think there would be one size fits all. So I don't think I'll be able to say you need to do by XYZ package, and if you do that, that will solve all your problems. I think it's really I think it's a challenge for those within organisations to think about how they can do it. But I think so long as I said before, the principles around being discerning, around keeping important information that impacts on the safety of the building in electronic format, which can then be easily transferred across those different interfaces, I think that's ultimately the way to go.
Yeah. And we've had quite a few actually around questions on the assessment and auditing regime. Now I think that this may be really for the PAS leads who may want to talk a little bit about that. My understanding is the auditing and assessment will really be done through professional bodies rather than centrally through HSE. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah. The HSE won't be providing that role in terms of assessment. Any of that. So, I mean, we're working with industry at the moment to work out what the best approach is for the different roles and the different areas. And I think indeed the professional bodies is the word I was looking for, I think have a huge role in providing training and thinking about what the demonstration of competence will be, but we certainly don't see a role for government in doing that directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Well, let's move on now. And thank you very much, Andrew. That was really helpful and good. So I'm going to move on to hand over to Adrian Dobson now. So Adrian's the Executive Director in Professional Knowledge and Standards at RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects. So he's responsible for RIBA's education, practice and client services, and he's carrying out the leadership of its policy and public affairs work. Since the Grenfell Tower fire disaster in 2017, Adrian has supported the work of the RIBA Expert Advisory Group on fire safety and has been coordinating RIBA's input to the independent review of UK building regulations. So he's going to be talking about PAS 8671 and is the first of our PAS leads to talk about the new standards that are going to be coming through within the next month. So over to you, Adrian. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Claire, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so we're moving now to the first of the three new PAS standards that are going to be published very shortly, and that's PAS 8671, which is, of course, the standard for principal designers. Just a little bit of an overview, and I'll try not to repeat what's gone before. I mean, clearly what I call the pieces of the regulatory jigsaw are being put into place, and it's the passing of the Building Safety Act that really is the catalyst for us all to move into an implementation phase. There will shortly be the publication of the three new competence standards, 671, 672 and 673. and they are integrated as a suite under the overarching 8670. And certainly 8671 and 8672, the principal designer and the principal contractor, they follow a common document structure and a common competence format. So there will be a lot of legibility between the two documents. They will seem similar. What I'm going to consider just very briefly in these next 9 or 10 minutes or so is really three things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the broader implications for all designers of the new regulatory system. I think both Cara and Andrew made the point that whilst we're focused today on three particular duty holders, all designers, all contractors become duty holders under the new regime, and the definition of designer is very broad indeed. So yes, it will include engineers and architects and consultants, but in many cases it will be contractors, subcontractors and installers. Anybody making design decisions will find themselves with designer duties under this piece of legislation. And as Andrew said, in a way we're sort of familiar with that because of the CDM regulations, which clearly there's a lot of similarity between the two systems. I'll then talk just a little bit about the purpose, structure and basic content of 8671. When you do get to see the actual document, you won't find it too heavy a tone, but obviously there's quite a lot of detail in there, and I'll just skirt over the surface a little bit to give you an idea of how it's constructed. And then a little bit on, what are the opportunities and challenges for the construction sector, and I suppose in this case, the design sector in fulfilling these new roles. And I suppose from Andrew's slide, we appear to be in this sort of open and anxious category, so hopefully maybe I'll just sort of soothe some of that anxiety about what the way forward is going to be. So what are the implications for designers? Well, it's a clearing picture, but it's not a fully clear picture. There's lots of secondary regulation to still be put into place. Clearly, we know that the HSE, with its extensive powers and expertise, will be the Building Safety Regulator, and that, I think, does signal the seriousness of intent of the government. This is actually sort of coming directly from the Act itself. The client should have suitable arrangements in place to ensure that the design work and the building work can be completed in accordance with building regulations, and in practice, this means appointing the right people with the right competencies, and the various groups have defined that as skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours or organisational capability for the work, and ensuring those appointed have systems in place to ensure compliance with building regulations. So it's this whole competence area, and how do people satisfy themselves that they've got competent people that we're focused on today. Anywhere where there's more than one contractor on the project, the client will need to appoint a principal designer to be in control of the design phase and a principal contractor to be in control of the whole project during the construction phase. And as we've said, these duties, these core duties of cooperation, coordination, communication and competence apply to all the duty holders, not just the principal contractor and the principal designer. And indeed, there is a working group, one of the sector competence groups, Working Group 7, which is developing the designer standard, and they're now working very closely on the basis of the principal designer standard to make sure that the two mesh together as effectively as possible. Could I just have the next slide? I suppose I've lost a bit of control over that. Thank you very much, thank you. So how does PAS 867 work? How is it applied to individuals and designated individuals? PAS 8671 responds to, and we've only seen the draft of these APICD regulations, as I think we're going to get to know them, which require a client to appoint a designer with control over the design work as the principal designer, and to take all reasonable steps to satisfy themselves that that person or entity is adequately competent. If the principal designer is an organisation, it must designate an individual under its control to manage its duty holder functions. And it does seem likely in reality that on all but the smallest projects, the principal designer will indeed be an organisation. Otherwise, perhaps on a very small project, the principal designer is an individual taking responsibility for the duty holder role. And note that in the PAS, the principal designer definition includes both those individuals or those designated individuals in the case of an organisation. And as the previous speakers have said, we need to reiterate that PAS 8671 does not in itself cover the duties of a principal designer under the CDM regulations, but a single individual or organisation may well undertake those roles. I could just have the next slide, please. So on this slide, just showing you the basic structure of how the competencies are set out. They're really set out in 4 main areas: appropriate behaviours, legislative and regulatory framework for compliance, so what does the law and the regulations actually require, management of design work compliance, which I suggest will be the very core of what the principal designer has to do, and technical framework for compliance. In other words, the knowledge base that these people need of construction and building regulations in order to be able to make meaningful management take place and meaningful design risk management take place. The way that the document is structured under each of these areas of competence is to set out what we call minimum competence requirements, which are then further defined through specific requirements. So it's almost like a code of conduct, if you like, where you've got the principles and then the specific requirements. And then, as with all of the past standards, we've had to look at what are the additional competence requirements in relation to work on the higher risk buildings. And what we found is that, generally speaking, there's huge overlap between the competencies required for every building and for the specific higher risk buildings, but there are additional pieces of knowledge and understanding and application of the additional regulatory procedures that are going to be important, and Andrew has already begun to sort of set out some of those additional procedures that are involved. And I think perhaps the question for the future is, at the moment, we only have one category of higher risk building, which is residential buildings above 80 metres, but it seems quite conceivable that other building types may be added. And perhaps one of the questions for certifying bodies and indeed people who update these standards in the future will be, do you need specific competencies, perhaps in relation to specific types of buildings which carry perhaps different types and shapes of risk? If I could have the next slide, please. So, as I said, I'm not able in the time available to us to dig too far into the detail, but I've just on this slide just set out a little bit more explanation of what's meant under each of these headings. So, appropriate behaviour, and really this is a reference back to the behavioural competencies that are set out in the overarching flex. And I suppose one of the most important things is to know the limitations of your own expertise and when you need to consult and appoint others. You then got the legislative and regulatory framework. So these principal designers are going to be applying that framework, and they need to have a good understanding of it and how design work needs to comply with the law. Then, as I say, you've got the real core of the matter, the management of design work compliance. So principal designers should be able to apply principles of management to plan design work compliance and to manage, monitor and coordinate designers and design work. And as I sort of began to set out a little earlier, that's quite a complex issue because there are, in our world now, a plethora of designers that are involved in putting together these projects. And then finally, under the technical framework for compliance, this is really setting out the principles of building design and construction and the core criteria for building safety set out in Flex 8670, and saying this is the technical knowledge base that a certified principal designer should have. Next slide, please. So just to finish, I just want to reflect slightly on what are the challenges and opportunities. Any of us that work in organisations who are potentially certifying bodies, we're soon going to get our hands on these standards. So anybody interested in certifying principal designers will be able to see what's in PAS 8671. And one of the questions is, will suitable organisations come forward, and will they make the necessary investment in developing certification and registration schemes? And we've been doing a little bit of work on that at the RIBA, and it's a not insignificant investment, both in time, money and expertise that's required. Another question is, if we take an honest look at our industry, is there a sufficient skills and experience base within the construction industry? And how long will it take to build up the pool of certified principal designers? And indeed, one of the questions we've been asking ourselves is, how long will it take to build up an initial pool of peer assessors that can actually help us with that assessment process? Is that expertise available, even before you begin to develop a pool of certified principal designers? And the legislation suggests that the principal designer duty holder role should have what I've called here whole building capability and control of the design work. They have a guiding hand role in terms of this design coordination. But as we know, design responsibility has become very fragmented and mired in complex contractual arrangements, and these duty holders are going to be set out within contracts as well as within legal frameworks. So how will that conundrum be resolved, and especially in what is essentially the predominant form of procurement now, which is design and build? And then the final question I've raised here in terms of challenges and opportunities is, and I think Andrew and Cara have also touched on this already, there's some concern that in parts of the industry, perhaps there isn't, perhaps whether it's a belief or a wish, but a sense that this is really about these higher risk buildings, you know, and is there a general lack of awareness and certainly preparedness for the fact that this is a general or universal system. It is going to apply to the great majority of building work. It isn't something just for this narrow sector. And is there sufficient awareness? And I think Cara outlined a date of October 2023, which might seem a long way away, but isn't very far for the industry to prepare. And I think that's the end of my little slot, Claire.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Adrian. And I know you are busy this afternoon and have to make a quick getaway, but if you don't mind taking a couple of questions that have come through. So will CDM 2015 be revised and updated to synchronise with 8671? Is that something you're able to respond to?
Probably not got the real capability to respond, Claire, but I mean, the only thing I would say is I think in setting out the paths, it was quite a big piece of work for that particular committee and group to put together. And so quite rightly, they focused their ambition on, you know, what is the competence requirement in relation to the new Act. But they were conscious all the time that clearly there is a parallel with CDM, and that in many cases the same organisation will perform both roles. And I think that's, so for example, from the RIBA's point of view as a certifying or as a potential certifying body, one of the questions we're asking ourselves is, do we offer a dual certification? Do we offer just single certifications? So that's going to be one of the questions, I think, over the next 12 months, really, yes. Yeah,
and certainly it did come up a lot, didn't it? And you know, there was it was always there in the discussions within the steering group, how they work together. So a couple of questions about HRBs and about all buildings. You know, are these applying to all projects now, not just HRBs?
Yes, so I mean, I think that's one of the messages that we're struggling to get across. I think that there is a perception that this doesn't apply to all buildings, and I think also that gives you a sense of the potential number of people that may need to be certified. It's potentially quite ambitious, and I think that's going to be a huge challenge as well. You know, even as we've looked at it, we've realised that this is a scale beyond the normal certification that the RIBA would do. We've certified specialisms in the past, and they've been specialisms. They've been relatively narrow. This is quite a general system, and it's going to be, you know, and as everybody keeps saying, it's the biggest change in the building regulations environment since the Building Act of 1984, really. So it's a big change, a big shift.
Yes, it's huge. It is huge, isn't it? So one final one, if you don't mind, and perhaps leads on from that really, who will be best placed and qualified to undertake this role of the principal designer, especially in relation to that CDM role as well?
Yes, I mean, so the legislation is clear that it should be a designer, but it doesn't say any more than that. So it will be, and I'm sure it will vary from project to project. That's absolutely for certain. I mean, I think one thing that may happen in reality is, I think, because we think on most buildings this will be an organisational duty holder, it may well be that a single individual can't retain the full skill set for every project. You know, so one of the things they're going to have to understand is, you know, who else in their organisation is going to be involved in helping them to discharge that duty. So I think rather than suggesting it's one omnipotent person, you know, on a small project, it may well be the architect that is the principal designer. But in reality, once you get to larger projects, I think it's going to be a much more complex field, and it will depend whether the project is primarily seen as engineering-led, etc. You know, so I think that we'll see a range of professionals come forward, and that's going to be a challenge for the certifying bodies. You know, and another question: does a certifying body, if it's a professional body, does it only certify members of its own profession? Or should it be looking to certify a broader range of professionals, you know, and does it have the capability to make assessments about what another professional needs in order to fill the gaps, if you like, to act in this guiding hand role?
Yeah, yes, yeah. So there is still so much to do and things to clarify. All right, well, thank you very much, Adrian. That's great. And we'll move on now to Pete Dauber, the CEO from Solvere Limited. Pete is a fellow of Chartered Institute of Builders and RICS, and was a senior academic and dean of one of the largest schools of the built environment in the UK before leaving academia to establish his own consultancy, Solvere. So he served as chair of a number of industry and professional boards at a regional, national and international level, and recently completed a term as a trustee of the Chartered Institute of Builders. We've been really pleased to have him as our PAS lead for PAS 8672 for contractor competence. So over to you, Pete. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I'll keep my camera off if you don't mind, only for the fact that I'm going to be flicking between quite a few documents on my desk, and it's easy for me to do that without trying to look into the screen as well, so if that's okay. It's difficult. I have to follow Adrian. We've worked very closely together over the last 2 years, and Anthony, and which has been a really good thing. And I think what Adrian's done is he set out the kind of the context and the scope and the brief that we had, which I was going to talk to, but I'm just going to jump over a few things and just obviously focus on the relevance for the principal contractor. And I think one of the good processes that's gone through in this whole project has been the fact that the PAS leads all sat on each other's PAS as observers, and often, in fairness, were contributing as well, so that we had shared thinking, shared understanding. We used common language, so that the PASs that have been produced, you'll see some commonality, particularly between 71 and 72 for the principal designer and principal contractor. So I think that's been something of real value. What I want to do then, I'm just going to kind of set a very brief context. This is just to explain the scope of what the PAS attempted to do. So this is the kind of scope that we were given as a group. The kind of sources of information clearly were was the as it's called, what we call it, a shortened acronym, but looking for it, the appointment of persons, industry competence and duty holders regulations. As Adrian said, these are in draft format. But they give a very good steer of the expectations of the role. So almost kind of not a job description, but the expectations of that. And also there's some very helpful fact sheets that you can all access free from what was the Ministry of Housing, but now is DLUC as well. So they were kind of primary sources, but obviously the main driver for this was the Building Safety Act and the need for all individuals undertaking any work, any design or building work, to be competent, and that was the kind of the main driver. And as all colleagues are going to be stating, and have been said at least 3 or 4 times I've heard already, that these regs do apply to all work where the building regulations apply. The only exceptions is a domestic client working on their own property. And that was quite a challenge, and because then we had to look at the competencies for a range of projects, from the very simple very simple extension work or refurb work on a small project, right the way through to highly complex projects, whether they're maintenance, refurb, or new build as well. So it gave us a very broad range of types of work for the individuals to be able to be competent to deliver. And as Adrian said as well, there were some overriding duties for all duty holders in terms of cooperation, coordination, communication, and competence. And then, as well as having the requirements for all work, there were specific requirements that were required for HRBs, which Adrian's already mentioned. So what we kind of had to define ourselves, and it was quite clear through most of the documents I've already referred to, is we need to identify, well, who is this individual? And as Adrian has said, on any project, there could be multiple contractors, but there will be a principal contractor as there will be a principal designer. And the role that we've specified, if you like, is that principal contractor, the person who takes overall control of the work. So including pre-commencement work, any off-site delivery, any pre-manufacturing work, it's that individual who's procuring subcontractors, procuring materials, not only site activities, but the work that surrounds that as well. And the emphasis is on the client to be sure that they're appointing a competent principal designer and a principal contractor. And that means they have the right skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours, the SCEB that we're constantly referring to. And clearly the important role here is, how does the client do that? How can they test that the person that they want to appoint is competent? And equally, how does a principal designer and principal contractor seeking work demonstrate to the client that they're competent to deliver that project? So what we're trying to create was this framework of assessment, if you like. In terms of the overall role, then, it's the principal contractor is the person who plans, manages, and monitors the building work, and making sure, as has been said, there's cooperation, coordination, communication between all the key duty holders, as well as, in the principal contractor's case, their employees and the people within their teams. It's interesting when we start getting down to design and build, because, as we know, in that procurement route, often the principal contractor will be appointed to undertake design work as well, and detailed design work, and perhaps the whole design work. In that case, the principal contractor would also likely to be appointed the principal designer. So again, the client needs to satisfy themselves that that one organisation is competent, or that one individual is competent to deliver both those roles. And again, the question was, well, how does the client do that, and how does that organisation demonstrate that? It's worth remembering as well, though, and Adrian said this, that any contractor who specifies or undertakes any design work, which is common in any procurement route, they have to demonstrate that they are competent to do so. And as Adrian has said, Working Group 7 are looking to produce a framework of competency for those doing design work. So whether you're a QS writing a specification, or you're a buyer procuring work, then under the Act, that describes them as a designer. So in most cases, a contractor is going to be the principal contractor, and to some extent a designer, but could be a principal designer as well. So in terms of the structure, very similar to as Adrian described. As I said, we've worked very closely together. The PAS itself describes the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours required of individuals acting as a principal contractor for all building work. It then goes on, as Adrian's alluded to then say, what are the additional duties and responsibilities for principal contractors working on HRBs, and then it defines what those additional competencies that are required would be. As Adrian said, the legislation does allow for the principal contractor to be an individual, so it could be a self-employed project manager who's overseeing some work for a client on a fairly small scale project, up to, and probably most likely, being a contracting organisation that is delivering a much larger project. And again, the brief that we had was we needed to make sure that the competencies were appropriate for both. So the PAS does not discriminate between whether it's an individual or the designated individual working for a contract organisation. The the PASs are, the competencies are exactly the same. One key focus, and again Adrian's mentioned this, is about individuals working within their own limits. So a primary competence is knowing the boundaries of your competence. And when you start to, or think you're about to exceed them, is to raise that and to seek assistance and guidance. So again, a competence is to have the right kind of conversations with other specialists and other knowledgeable people to be able to understand what's taking place in the project. And there's a requirement again, and this comes through the appointment of persons regulations, that no one can ask anyone else to undertake work to which they're not competent to do so. So again, the principal contractor, principal designer, and others need to know the competency of anyone that they engage and ask them to make sure that they engage within it. And as Adrian just said, it's in bold. The PAS focuses on the requirements to deliver safe buildings, not building buildings safely. So it very much focuses on that role. It's quite clear that it's most likely to be the same individual. And when you look at the competencies, there's a very strong overlap between what you would expect from the principal contractor under the CDM regs and the principal contractor under the Building Safety Act. So again, these are the kind of headline figures in terms of, sorry, I'm going to give you some figures, the headline for the actual PAS itself. In total, there are 53 competencies, detailed competencies. They're made up of the ones on the left there where you can see legal requirements managing building work. There's about, well, there are 38 of those for all buildings. And then we have the 5 behavioural competencies that you can see there, ethical principles and leadership. So for all buildings, we've identified 43 competencies that individuals need to be able to demonstrate, roles that they can demonstrate competency in for all building works. And then there's an additional 10 for high-risk buildings. So where you see a number in brackets, the first, if I take legal and contractual requirements, there are 2 competencies under that heading, and they're for all buildings. When you see managing building work, there are 4 for all buildings, but 2 specifics for HRBs. So I just thought it might be worth just showing you where the emphasis is, and there's no surprise that where we talk about managing information, certainly with the golden thread and those additional activities for the construction control plan and for contributing to the safety file and the safety case, then there's additional responsibilities there. So they are, there's 53 in total, as I said, 43 for all buildings, and then 10 additional ones for the HRBs. Under the behaviours, the 5 that are listed there, they're just a couple that I just want to refer to, one specific, and I've already mentioned about managing your own competence and working within your own boundaries of competence and asking others, and also appointing other competent individuals, which is a requirement of the principal contractor. There's the leadership in terms of developing a safety culture, and this is aimed at creating a climate on site and off site where individuals feel that they're able to report if they see work that is not appropriate, is not being completed properly, or has been damaged since it's been inspected and therefore no longer complies. So there's developing that culture. But there's one very important clause that I always refer to in the APICD regulations are referred to, and I'm just going to quote it. It says that necessary behaviours include, quote, compliance with relevant requirements and refusing to carry out building work which is not compliant with relevant requirements. That's a very strong focus to say this is not about building to the design or design compliance. This is about being compliant with relevant requirements, the building regs. So the technical knowledge of principal contractors needs to very much include very good detailed knowledge of the building regulations. They're not expected to put the design right, but they are expected to recognise when it doesn't seem to comply and then raise those issues with the design team. Just in terms of future, Adrian's talked about this, but clearly to be deemed competent, individuals are going to have to be tested against this contractors framework. There's a requirement that it's not like a one test and that's it, you can walk away, you're now competent for the next 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years. There's a requirement that individuals maintain that competence through a commitment to CPD, and that CPD being aligned to the work that they're undertaking. So there's an ongoing expectation that that will continue. As Adrian said, professional institutions, particularly the CIOB and then and perhaps CITB, will be looking towards being an awarding authority, so that they can sign off members that they have, but also potential new members. And being a member of a professional body, as has been said earlier, does not guarantee competence. It's a step towards it, but there will be additional requirements perhaps to demonstrate that competence. They'll be seeking third-party accreditation so that no one's marking their own homework. That's the kind of expectation and intent, so that they can assure others that their processes are robust. And there's obviously going to be, the scheme is going to be available for people who aren't chartered or member of a trade body, but want to do some kind of gap analysis to see whether or not they would be deemed competent to be appointed to a principal contractor, and then they can follow the appropriate route through some awarding body to get that demonstration. It's a bit like doing a kind of self-test, the written test of the highway code before you decide to embark on taking your kind of driving lessons, if you like. And I think that's me finished. So thank you, and I'll pass back to Claire, and I will now turn my camera on as well.
Great, thank you very much, Pete. I think there's not been a lot of questions coming through. I think you've been so comprehensive, but I did want to raise that you know, what's your sense of the challenge of appointing the principal contractors, actually fulfilling that need, and you know, what kind of a shift is needed, not just in numbers, but expanding the knowledge base.
I think, I mean, my background is 30 years in the sector, in the industry. Part of it has been academia, but we're working closely a lot with contractors and contracting organisations. And I think Adrian said a very important point, and that is numbers. It's how do you get so many people through the assessment regime once it's been designed. But I'm fairly, I've spoken with 1 or 2 major contractors who are already looking at this and developing competency frameworks, which now they're going to align a bit more with the PAS 2. But I'm just judging by some of the work that you see, and I go to quite a few construction awards as well. The quality of work by some is excellent. There's no question about that, but they've never been tested. And so I think I'm confident that there are many people out there who would be deemed competent, but it's just that they're not being assessed. And so I think it is that point. There will be people who will need to do some upskilling, and part of what we're looking to plan is the gap analysis and kind of put some assessment together for people who need to upskill. But it's just recognising those that are out there that are competent but have never been asked to demonstrate that. And getting them certified, if you like. That's going to be the big challenge, I think.
Yeah, and as you say, perhaps that whole expansion. I mean, there's so much more work going on in industry apart from the work that we've been doing. Industry itself actually developing frameworks in the sectors and the subsectors. So all of that's going to sort of, you know, all be mapped to our BSI Flex, and it will all work together, and it should all be consolidated. So that it actually does a sort of general move in the right direction across the board.
Yeah, you mentioned that we've also been looking at, through Working Group 9, developing the competency framework for site supervisors, so the person who sits below the principal contractor, the kind of eyes and ears of the principal contractor, but also the lead for a work package as well, who would be again working directly to the principal contractor. So there's a lot of other work, as you say, in place where people can be mapped against.
Great, and a quick one, I hope, before I let you go, which is how often will I have to be tested?
Well, that's an interesting debate, isn't it? It's some have talked of maximum 5 years, others have talked of more frequently. My kind of suggestion to this is and I've had this debate. If you have a very robust CPD program, which does measure reflection, it doesn't. So sitting on a webinar, turning your camera on, and then go and make a cup of tea and say, "Well, I attended this webinar, I've done my CPD." But if you have a very robust CPD process where you test people's reflections and learning of the CPD, and that demonstrates and maps that they are continuing to be competent, you could extend the assessment point. If you have a very weak CPD approach, so you don't really know whether or not people are continuing to do it and it's not being assessed and tested, I think it needs to be more frequent. That's why I think it's going to be down to, it's going to be a package together. How robust is your CPD and testing of that CPD, that can extend the duration. There's talk of it being no more than 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, and yes, so we're out of time, I'm afraid. So let's thank you so much, Pete, and I will move on now to Anthony Taylor, who's going to be talking about PAS 8673. Anthony is the interim chair of the newly formed Building Safety Alliance, which I think he'll probably talk quite a little bit about. He's also a consultant who's worked at a senior level in various organisations on professional governance, risk and compliance for national and international real estate companies. Since 2018, he served as the chair of the Working Group 8 on the Competence Steering Group, developing all the thinking behind the Building Safety Manager competence in response to Dame Judith Hackett's report. Over to you then, Anthony. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Claire. Given time, and perhaps we can get straight into the presentation. What I'm planning on doing is give you a little bit of a background on the origins, because as Claire mentioned, when we started this journey, as one might say, we were looking at Dame Judith Hackett's recommendation to have a building safety manager. In its purest form, the concept was to have an individual responsible for each big building. As most of you will understand, most of the residential, not all, but most residential buildings do not have on-site staff anymore. They're possibly used to. So the role as envisaged by Dame Judith was new to this country as a general rule. We certainly had building managers. We certainly had people who are competent in managing agents, and particularly in the private and the public sector, organisations delivering what has become the role for buildings, the management of building safety. But to start with, we were tasked with looking at this, what is the competences necessary for a building safety manager, a very specific role. And we recognise there are differences between the public and the private sector. But on the short of it anyway, we came up with a draft standard framework, which we put out a consultation as Working Group 8. We took on board on those comments, and our final report was Annex 8A in setting the bar, which is the CSG's overall report from the Competence Steering Group Industries report about the competences right across industry, and that was in October 20. So therefore our draft framework was handed over to the BSI to turn into PAS speak, if more official terms. And we had, as Claire's already alluded to, we didn't have quite as many as 8670, but we had a lot of questions, both from the steering group, which I'll come on to in a minute, who are the people who sit and try and devise the panel, but devise the document prior to it going out to public consultation, etc. So we had, the initial kickoff was in February 21. The consultation of the BSI framework for the BSM, the Building Safety Manager, still an individual at this point, went out in August, and came back in September, and we had 403 comments, which we went through, and I'm happy to report that a lot of it was in the detail, but generally the there was a lot of support for the concept that we were trying to get across. We then had a number of meetings to get through those 403 meetings. And then in March 22, as many of you will know, the role of the individual building safety manager came out of the Act. Now, the only thing that came out of the Act was actually the duty for the accountable person to appoint a building safety manager as an individual. That individual was never a duty holder. The accountable person, it's in the name, was the duty holder. So it wasn't an entirely surprising thing, because a lot of the work we've been undertaking and undertaking with others, it was quite obvious that organisations are often better placed to handle all the competencies. Again, I'll come on to that in a minute, because there's a very wide base of competence and knowledge you need to understand what it is to deliver a residential building safely, safe for the residents to live in. So we then went back to the PAS in April and said, well, actually the work we've done, the competences that they set out are still required effectively. So we re-looked at it and after a number of further meetings, realigned it more to organisations, because organisations is recognised as the people who are going to deliver the duties to on behalf of the accountable person. And they would need to have the accountable person would need to have the assurance that the people they had employed, these organisations, which might be an FM company, it might be a managing agent, or they may do it in-house themselves. So we rejigged it, but also at the point Pete and I think Adrian said, if you are an organisation, you need to have a competent individual within your organisation to be able to manage the resources and have the authority to manage the resources and the competence of the people who are actually delivering the project on your behalf. So it's going to be published later this month, later in July, and we believe it's going to be reviewed, likely to be in about a couple of years, potentially following in the longer term to the 8670 to produce standard. Could we have the next slide, please? So that's the background for it. Now, when we got to the BSI, a steering group was created. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but you can see there that a great deal of effort was put to get a wide range of opinions from different sectors of the occupied sector. And I just remind you that we're talking now essentially about residential buildings originally over 80 metres or 7 stories. However, the PAS at an early stage, and as my two predecessors have said, the PAS is very carefully geared at all residential buildings. Now, there's a lot of discussion within that, within the steering group, as to whether the PAS should reflect the regulation which deal with spread of fire and structures only, whether we should look at a more holistic attitude with all the regulations already in place to deliver safe buildings. Next slide, please. So the long and the short of it, the PAS is looked at as a holistic document. So we're looking at all of the competences necessary to manage a residential building of any size holistically to ensure the whole thing is safe for people to live in. There are areas within the PAS that have been highlighted to say that if you choose, if the accountable person chooses to want to have somebody who is certified as competent only to deal with the issues to deal with the Building Safety Act, as I've said, spread of fire and structures, then there is a mechanism within the PAS that could be done, but we would encourage people not to look at it really that way and to look at it much more holistically. That is the content. We've tried to design it so it's a bit like peeling onions. Terms, definition, abbreviated terms. The terms and the definitions are very important. And we're, as Pete and Adrian have suggested, we've tried to tie these in across the PASs and across 8670 quite clearly. We've got competence areas and the actual competencies, and then to explain what is meant by a phrase which describes a competency. So that is the content. As I say, it's set out like peeling an onion so that you can start reading through it and begin to understand and get deeper and deeper into what is expected of an organisation to deliver, and indeed of an individual within that organisation to manage. Next slide, please. So the scope, as I said, building structures and building systems, including building services. The interactions, these have basically come out of the Building Safety Act and indeed the relevant bits of the Fire Safety Act. And indeed, we looked across all the other regulations that have been in place for many, many years. I draw your attention to the bullet point talking about managing the golden thread, including other digital information. I'm not going to go into that in deep, but what we are saying is organisations who are managing buildings are going to have to understand how to manage this golden thread. So it's a specific competence of understanding data management, I would suggest. Not as a full-time data manager, but you need to understand it, you need to understand this information has got to be true, it's got to be verified, it's got to be managed, it's got to be distributed and brought back in. So that is there are elements in here that we would hope most people delivering, and I take simply by way of example, managing agents and FMs, or in the larger organisations, the in-house departments, will have a lot of these competencies and have been delivering a lot of this role over many years, some better than others, no doubt. But as has also been said previously, there has never been a text, a document against which to measure these people's capabilities or these organisations' capabilities. Key there again at the bottom, the last bullet, we've spoken about it, personal commitment to ethical behaviour and professional standards. You will have seen dotted throughout the guidance within the PASs and indeed from government is expression SCEP, skills, knowledge, experience, which is the basis of competence we've all long known about and have long been tested against. The new one, or relatively new one, is behaviours, and we've spent a lot of time collectively trying to understand what does that mean. We've had some description about that. That is understanding the limit of your own competence, and as Pete's just said, it's also understanding your personal responsibility to accountability, responsibility and accountability. So within this PAS, we're talking about the organisations actually saying it's not our job, it is our job to make sure this is done properly. And it's the job of this senior manager to understand that these things are being done and to manage and monitor. So behaviour is really important right there across the piece. With regard to behaviours of organisations, we might use the word cultural. So we need to get the culture into organisations. We've heard it explained, the term no blame, and so on and so forth. So people can express concerns without having sanctions put against them. So this is the scope of the stuff. It's set out in 8670, and as has been mentioned, all these PASs can be mapped back to 8670 in one way or another. We've also given guidance on the individual competence in Annex A, as I've mentioned, and it's applicable to all residential developments and all developments that incorporate residential accommodation. One of the matters that vexed us to start with was the fact that the Building Safety Act only deals with the residential part of, let us say, a mixed-use building. So there are two regimes in place already. The Building Safety Act dealing with the residential part, which may well be above a number of commercial units, where the Fire Safety Act and a number of other things operate. So the cooperation and coordination of all of this is very central. Hence the desire for us to set this PAS out as a holistic building, holistic competencies for a whole building, because you've got to understand what's going on in all parts of this building, even if you don't have control of them. Next slide, please. So the competence areas have been set out as they're listed there. The operating environment, the legal framework, responsibilities, accountancy, the golden thread requirements. So this is the, what do you actually have to do on a daily basis sort of thing. Leadership and teamwork, ethics right up front there, professional standards, leadership, delegation and empowerment, understanding the difference between delegating things and empowering people, particularly in relation to organisations. Building systems and safety. This is a fairly technical area, and we don't expect everybody to be expert at everything, or but within an organisation, you should have the expertise to deal with all of these at a sufficient level. Where you don't have that, then it is the responsibility of the organisation to go out and find it and admit that you haven't got it. Because not everybody has all of this to their hand at all times. Operational practices, very key to all of this is a safety management system. Naturally, we don't define what the safety management system is, because different companies and different organisations will operate different ones. As has been mentioned before, the golden thread is very tied up in the management system of that. You might find that the accountable person has their safety management system, and that has to interact very carefully with those who provide the services. I would take, for example, either internally or the managing agents or the FM service providers, who will have their own separate safety management systems. All these things have to integrate, which is part and parcel of the golden thread, but we won't go into that in detail. Risk management, the whole of this bill is of the Building Safety Act is about risk management. We're trying to take a new approach. It's not simply a matter of, have I got to do this? This is compliant, tick. Trying to get particularly accountable persons and those who have responsible jobs to understand the building and the risks involved in that building to the residents, the risk to the residents and people who work in and around the building, and understand it holistically. And this is pretty much a new approach. The safety case system, and I'm not talking the safety case report, is a new approach within the occupied sector. So we've got a great deal of education to do about that. And of course, there's planning, monitoring and control. So this is principles we all know about. Next slide, please. Within each of these, we shall, the person. Now, a person is a legal term which can mean either an organisation, which in law can be viewed as a person, and that's why I've pulled people's attention to the definition. Where we use the word person in this document, it means either or an organisation or an individual person. But every which way, for each of those competence areas, these competencies need to be very clear and evidenced. As Peter's talked about, and indeed Adrian's talked about, it's all very well having these PASs, but at some point, somewhere, somebody's got to be tested against them. So we're all working, and certainly I'm working with others to try and work out schemes of how we can look at testing these things and having all that verified by third parties. Next slide, please. The competencies, I've gone through that, but I just wanted to repeat that because the previous slide, with all those different, the sort of behaviours and things need to fit within each of these competence areas. But in Annex A, we'll get a much greater detail of what we actually mean by the term risk management. Next slide, please. Within the annexes, Annex A is the individual competencies I've just mentioned. So where we've got sort of one line saying risk management means this, or we need to do this to comply with that. In Annex A, we're looking at quite detailed explanation of what is meant for it. This is in order to guide people to self-assess themselves before putting themselves forward for certification. And Annex B is a guide to look at how people are going to be judged, so they can see what it is already. We've set out the criteria for the assessment process. Thank you. Next slide. Right, the key takeaways, whoever takes on the overseeing role should have the necessary skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours. So this is safety management systems, and we're talking about whole buildings with holistic practices to deal with all the individual elements that need to keep this building functioning. The PAS can be used as a benchmark to assess the competence of those performing the in-occupation activities. So the idea here is we can judge FM providers or the in-house FM provision, perhaps in some large organisations, or maybe a managing agent, whoever it happens to be, or against this PAS, can they deliver what they say they're going to be delivering? And indeed, as an individual, we need to be able to check that those who are being procured to offer these services, we can use them and judge them against this PAS as well. So this is what it's been designed to deal with. It's also designed so that the duty of the accountable person, or potentially the principal accountable person, or those delegating to others, whoever it may be, managing agent, what have you, can use the PAS to cast their eye over the people who are providing services to them under contract. So that is fundamentally the purpose of it. Thank you. Next slide. Now, having got to the point where we have the PAS, we now have to consider how we're going to get this out into the sector. So what I'm talking here is implementation. So we've been working for a long time on the PAS to get there, but there are no specific professional bodies looking at this isolated area, the occupied sector, with a wide focus. So we decided to create something called the Building Safety Alliance in March last year as a cross-sector, non-for-profit, independent forum. So what we're trying to do, dare I say, the construction industry, the construction sector has been very well organised for many years. They can speak with one voice. So regulators and others, they can interact. There is no such singular body or debating forum, in one better word, within the occupied sector. So we've been challenged to try and put that together. So that is the intent, and we are intent upon getting representation from all of those bullet points. So right the way across the sector. Anybody who's interested in that, please get hold of me, post this, and I can give you more details. We're also very pleased that the government, in an observer role, because they're there to, they're there to listen and to guide us to make sure that the alliance and the group, we've got about 50 of the major organisations and professional bodies, trade bodies around, and we're growing as we go. But we were keen to have government or the BSR, due like the Welsh government has joined the UCAS, to observe and just to make sure that we're going in the right direction, because we're all working as a huge body of people trying to work to the same output, is a higher level of competence within the residential sector specifically, is my concern, in order to deliver safe homes for the people who live in them. Next slide, please. So the vision of the Alliance, let's say sector leadership, collaborative working. As we've all spoken about in these, we've had a vast amount of collaborative working, and we just don't want to say, we've got the PAS now, everybody go home, there it is, you've got the document, act on it. We're very keen to keep the collaboration and to try and pull the industry together and take all the voices. Not everybody's going to agree with everything. So, and without any question, and from personal experience, having been doing this for a few years now, the idea is to draw as much consensus, but where there is a dispute or a disagreement, then to take that on the nose and let's see if we can sort it out. Because generally, if people are in significant disagreement, there's a good reason. So we're trying to flush all this out to make it a smooth passage. And I say the essence of it is to get this culture change, which is going to be a significant job. Thank you. Next page. Practical work. So what the Alliance actually does, we hold full forum meetings on a quarterly basis at least, in order to bring everybody up to date with where the law is. We're kindly supported, as I've said, by government, the BSR and various others who give us an update. We also take sector specifics. We've got issues who want to talk about it. We are looking at trying to develop with some of the members some guidance on how to deliver residential building safety management as a specific. So we have, hopefully, with the involvement of the HSE, the Building Safety Regulator, so that we can all start at least from the same point. And naturally, that's going to have to be a relatively low point for some, but it's going to, as Andrew pointed out, there are sort of 4 quadrants that we've got to address. It's got to be achievable, and we've got to be able to ratchet it up over the years. And we're looking at schemes to take this PAS and actually develop it into a pipeline of people, or sorry, of organisations and indeed people, should they wish to be judged and certificated by third parties as competent to this PAS. And we're hoping that the Alliance collectively will act as a guide, a sort of guardian of this, and with all the experience of the implementation over the next 2 or 3 years, we can collectively bring that back, give it back to the BSI, and the PAS can be reflect actual experience, and that's one of the purposes of it. Thank you. Next slide. There we are. I'm done. So if you've got time for questions, Claire, I'm happy to take any if anybody's got.
Thank you. Yes, and we are running a little bit short of time, but I did want to ask you this one around organisational competence, and if there's a if the PAS is assessing organisations' competence, is there any sense of how many people involved in a building that would need to comply, or is it down to a single person to be happy that the people they're working with or are competent?
Can I answer that in two ways? Historically, one of the things that's plagued the industry is that we have assumed that an organisation holds itself out, says, "Oh, I'm a competent supplier." Very few times, or indeed many times, that those suppliers actually check the competence of those individuals who are delivering the work. So the intent of the PAS is to make sure anybody, and in fact all of them, is the people who work on HRB specifically, but generally in any residential building, are competent to undertake the work, whatever that happens to be, individually. But that means the organisations have got to step up their monitoring of the competence of their own people. With regard to the volumes of it, it rather depends, and that will depend entirely, because the way the private sector and the public sector are structured are slightly different. The public sector will typically have the resources in-house, so collectively they'll manage those, and they might need to check that they've got the competences and the resources in-house at the right level. And if they haven't, they need to be able to have a model to employ people from the outside, so they've got the right competence to hand. In the private sector, it may be that the accountable person reaches out contracts with a managing agent or an FM, or indeed there might be a contractual line, and everybody's going to be checking that the people who are being asked to provide the service are competent to do so. But as I think it was Peter made the point, that actually the competent individuals or the competent organisations must themselves be sure they're competent to undertake the work they're offering to undertake. I hope that answers that question, whoever asked it. It's quite a wide one, but we're short of time, but I hope I got that reasonably.
All right,
clear.
Yes, thank you. And thanks very much then, Anthony. And
A pleasure.
we'll move on to our last speaker, Anna Fricker, my colleague who's a lead standards development manager at BSI, running a number of technical committees relating to competence, relating to BIM and digitalisation, and to facilities management. So really lots of relevant experience within this area. And she's the committee manager for CPB1, which is our new committee that she's going to be speaking about now. So over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and good afternoon to everybody attending today. As Claire said, I'm the committee manager for our new technical committee for competence in the built environment, designated as CPB1. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about its work today. So to give a little bit of background, at the start of the work programme in March 2020, BSI established the BECS strategy group to provide the strategic direction to the work programme and to help ensure that the work was linked with other activity taking place across the sector. And this group brought together a wide range of experts from across the sector, and its focus was on the development of BSI Flex 8670, which I'll talk about a little bit later, as well as supporting the scoping and planning for the PAS documents, which you've just heard about from Adrian, Peter and Anthony. So the first phase of the work programme finished with the release of BSI Flex 8670 in April 2021. And at that point, we established a formal technical committee under BSI as the national standards body to provide both continuity and long-term oversight for the development and maintenance of standards for competence in the built environment. As for all technical committees, CPB1 is responsible to our Standards Policy and Strategy Committee, and as its name suggests, the committee's scope covers the development of standards for the competence of all of those involved in the procurement, design, construction, management and maintenance of buildings, including high-risk buildings. There are two aspects to the committee's role. The first is to play a central role in monitoring and maintaining the existing competence standards, particularly as we move past publication of the PAS documents next month. And this will include the usual 2-yearly review process of the PAS documents to determine whether they should be maintained as they are, whether they should be revised, or whether they should be converted to British standards. Secondly, the committee is responsible for thinking about future standardisation needs for competence, whether these be PASs, FLEXs, or British standards. And as a technical committee, it is responsible for developing and maintaining new British standards within its scope. So as you can appreciate, the subject area covered by the committee is broad, and we have a range of stakeholders on the committee, as you can see on the diagram in front of you. And the committee's membership consists of representatives from nominating bodies, such as professional bodies, trade associations, academic institutions, certification bodies, government departments, etc., as well as individual experts and liaisons from other technical committees. And in common with all BSI technical committees, membership is continually reviewed to identify any gaps in expertise or representation. And if I go on to the next slide, you'll be able to see some of the nominating bodies which are currently represented on the committee. As you can see, we have representation from all 4 devolved administrations, as well as the regulator, HSE, and professional bodies and trade associations across the sector. You'll see we also have representatives from bodies such as the CIC, UCAS, the Engineering Council, and BSI's Consumer and Public Interest Network, as well as the Competence Steering Group, the Interim Industry Competence Committee, and the Competent Persons Forum. So the committee has been up and running for just over a year now, and it started to develop its work programme. Its primary focus is on the conversion of BSI Flex 8670 to a British standard, and this is to ensure that it has longevity and is maintained into the future. We're also looking at the development of supporting material for BS 8670 to help implementation from a standardisation perspective, and the committee is also starting to discuss other potential standardisation needs in areas such as terminology, organisational competence, and competence needs for construction products. As I mentioned previously, the main focus of the committee is on the conversion of the Flex to the BS. And I just wanted to take a little time to give a bit more information about the Flex itself. The Flex was sponsored by DLUC, and it was developed through an iterative process before the release of the final version in April of last year. It gives recommendations for core competence criteria for building safety and is applicable to buildings of all types and scales. And these criteria should be contextualised in sector-specific frameworks to reflect the competencies required of individuals to undertake a defined role, function, activity or task. It's best perhaps described as a framework for frameworks, as it is for those who develop, maintain or apply sector-specific frameworks, which should be mapped to the Flex. It is not intended to be used to assess individuals directly. As I say, the Flex sets out core criteria for the information structure and procedural components of sector-specific frameworks. It includes core behavioural criteria on ethics, leadership, management of competence, personal responsibility and duty of care, as outlined on the left, and includes building safety aspects, including fire, structural and public safety, and other core competence criteria for building safety. As I mentioned previously, new or existing sector-specific competence frameworks should be mapped to the Flex by defining the roles, functions, activities and tasks in scope and demonstrating how the core criteria are met, and any divergences from the Flex should be explained. If you would like a copy of the Flex, and I know this question came up a little bit earlier, if you would like a copy of the Flex and you do not have one, then it can be downloaded from the BECS website for free, and the link is at the bottom of that slide, but it will also be in the chat a little bit later. So now we are starting to move to convert the Flex to a British standard. And I think it's important to say at this point that the Flex is available for use, and it should be used up until the point that we publish the British standard. The BS will have the same scope as the Flex, and it will be developed through our usual process. So it will take, we expect, around 18 months to develop. And it will take into account learnings from the use of the Flex, including public comments, feedback from the PAS steering groups, other developments and material that have been published in the last year, and any other information that comes to us. The work will be undertaken by a technical author and a drafting panel underneath the committee, and the panel composition is similar to that of the advisory group for BSI Flex 8670 to help enable continuity and consistency throughout the process. Work is due to start shortly, and there will be an initial period of reviewing existing content and drafting, following which the draft will be released on our standards development portal for a 2-month public commenting period. And I would very much encourage people to comment on the draft at that stage. The comments will then go back to the panel for consideration and resolution before final approval and publication. And at the moment, we expect the standard to publish around early 2024, but that will depend to a certain extent on the amount of drafting that needs to take place and the number of comments we receive. So thank you very much for listening. If you would like to know more about the BECS programme or the committee itself, I've just put 2 QR codes on this final slide. The programme website contains a brochure on the work programme, links to download the Flex, and a form to get in touch with us. And information about the committee, its scope, its membership, and the standards which fall underneath its remit can be viewed at the link on the left, or sorry, on the right. So thank you once again, and I'll hand back to Claire.
Thank you, Anna. And if anyone does have any questions, they can be submitted through the competence website. There is a dedicated email address there. So I think we'll move to the close now. We have slightly overrun. It has been a really packed programme. I hope that's gone well. And perhaps I can hand over to you now. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Hand over to you now, Scott.
Well, thank you very much, Claire, and thank you, Anna, for that excellent presentation. Just to say, I found really fascinating the whole series. I mean, it's such a massive amount of information that we've shared with you there, and they're really excellent presentations. So just to say in closing, thank you very much, Claire, for hosting this important webinar, and I hope everybody online found that really helpful. And special thanks, I think, to our guest, Karim Santa from DLUC. Thank you, Cara. It's a great pleasure to see you again working away on this important topic. To Andrew Moore of the HSE, thank you very much for explaining the journey that you've been on in that really important area with the Building Safety Regulator, and particularly to Adrian Dobson of REBA, Pete Dorber of Solver, and Anthony Taylor. Great to see you again. Thank you for all the fantastic work you've put in on the building safety management role. I know you were passionate about that from the outset. This is just the beginning, of course. From now, we take these standards on into implementation, and it's up to you, to the industry, to the professional bodies, to the accreditation organisations, UCAS and Engineering Council, to lift and shift this work into practice. I'm very keen to stay involved, and I hope we can help see this lead to a sea change in the culture around competence in the built environment to protect people and the public and the industry wherever you're living and working. So thank you all for joining. That's been a really, really interesting webinar. Thank you all, and I think we're going to close it there. Thank you, Claire.
Yes, thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.